Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. So today, as usual, I'm going to be sharing with you all of the books I bought when I was emotionally vulnerable in the past month. Actually though, jokes aside, a lot of these books were ones that I wanted to use in a video or that were sent to me by publishers, or were just books that I wanted to buy to support the authors and the stories that they were telling. As usual, I want to remind all of you that you do not need to buy books to read them, to enjoy them, to be part of a book community. You can borrow from the library, whether it's a physical or ebook or audiobook. You can read digitally, which I do very often. So this is by no means an encouragement of just buying books for no reason, but it is a way of me just sharing some of the new books that I'm hoping to read very soon. So jumping right into it, I want to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month, and they were kind enough to send me 2 of their books, so I'm going to haul them today. Book of the Month is a really awesome online book service for readers. They're essentially a monthly book subscription service where you sign up for a monthly fee and you get a Book of the Month selection in your blue Book of the Month box each month, and the prices for Book of the Month are just absolutely outrageous because there is no cheaper price you can find for hardcover new release books. Book of the Month selections are usually a mix of new and early releases, and you can also add on previous selections at a discounted rate along with your Book of the Month. I really appreciate Book of the Month not only for their prices but also just the idea of taking the decision fatigue out of your hands. You can always rely on Book of the Month to have some really great selections each month, and they always range a different variety of genres. Now, those of you who are familiar with Book of the Month, you may not know that they actually have an app where you can actually grab an audiobook as your Book of the Month instead of the physical book, and members can rate, review, and participate in reading challenges on the app. Now, the 2 selections that I grabbed from Book of the Month for December are, first up, Tomb Sweeping by Alexandra Chang. This is actually an author I've read from before. She wrote Days of Distraction, which I absolutely loved, and this is a new short story collection from her that has stories set across the US and Asia, so I'm really excited for this one. And then the other book that I grabbed from Book of the Month is The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. This is a historical fiction, and it's about this Malayan mother who finds herself in the unlikely situation of becoming a spy for the invading Japanese during World War II. Both books sound fantastic, and as always, the Book of the Month team has just great selections. So if you're interested in grabbing either of those books or one of the other selections for the month, definitely go check out Book of the Month at the link down below, and if you use the code SWEATER, you'll get your first box for only $5 in the US. $5 is an insane deal for a hardcover new release book, so please go jump on that offer and grab your Book of the Month for this month. So those are the first 2 books that I have to haul today, and then I've got a whole bunch of others. I went to like 4 different indie bookstores this month, and I just found such a great selection of books that were ones that I needed to pick up for videos, but also just ones that I wanted to read that were on my list. And it's at this moment that I want to remind you all to definitely go grab books from your indie bookstores this holiday season, whether you're buying for yourself or for someone else. Indie bookstores are so great because they provide like personalized recommendations. The people who work there really care about the books that they're trying to sell, and you're also supporting a local business, and I think that that's like a really important thing to be doing. With that said, let's first up go through the fantasy sci-fi books that I grabbed from one of the fantasy sci-fi bookstores here in Toronto. It's a dedicated like indie bookstore for those genres. And the first book that I grabbed is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and this is by Heather Fawcett. This is the first in a series, and the reason I grabbed this one was because I want to read it as part of my Goodreads Choice Awards fantasy nominee reading vlog. I'm gonna be doing a whole vlog reading those nominees, or at least some of them, and this was definitely high on my list to read. I've been seeing this book everywhere for the past year, and I just really want to know if I'll end up enjoying it. From what I've heard, it's a pretty cozy fantasy. It follows our main character Emily Wilde, who's basically writing this encyclopedia about fairies, and she happens to be like this curmudgeonly professor, and she's traveling to this small town to do research for her encyclopedia of fairies. I feel like this one's gonna be just super fun and cute, and I think it's gonna be a really nice read for like the holiday times. Speaking of cozy, the other book that I also picked up for this like Goodreads fantasy nominee vlog is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is, I believe, a companion or sequel to the first book by the author, which is Legends and Lattes. I've talked about that book multiple times before. I've yet to read it yet, but I am planning to read it before I pick this one up for the fantasy vlog. And essentially what I know about these books in general is that they are high fantasy books with very low stakes. So So in this one, we have a battle-weary orc who essentially opens a bookshop, I believe, and there's a bit of a romance there, and I think it's gonna be really cute and cozy and fun for like the winter time as well, so I'm excited to pick this one out. Next up, also for the Goodreads fantasy vlog, I'm gonna be picking up Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I've heard so many amazing things about this book. It's also a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and I know a lot of people who have been excited to pick this one up. So although this wasn't initially on my radar to read, I have been convinced to pick it up. I vaguely remember from a few years ago that this author wrote a book called The 10,000 Doors of January, and a lot of people really enjoyed that book. I've never read it, but I do remember it being really hyped. The back of this book says that it is a gorgeously modern gothic fantasy, and that has me really excited because I love gothic anything, like gothic horrors, gothic fantasies. I love books that are set in the real world but have a fantastical element to it. So this does seem like it'll be a fun one, and I'm excited to see what I think of it. Now, while I was at that fantasy bookstore, I happened to see this short story collection, which is the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2023, and this is curated and edited by R.F. Kuang, who, if you don't know, is the author of Babel, Yellowface, the Poppy War series, one of my favorite authors. And I had seen news that this was gonna come out at some point this year, and I think it came out last month, so it's really new. There's a lot of really cool authors on this list. It seems like a lot of these are gonna be slightly creepy as well from what the description says, and overall I've just been really obsessed with short story collections recently, so I'm excited to see what I think of this. The final book that I picked up from the fantasy bookstore is one that I honestly wouldn't usually have picked up, but I was intrigued and I feel like this will be a fun one to read for a video. So that book is The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashem. This book was one of the finalists in the romantasy category for the Goodreads Choice Awards this year, which is the whole new category that they added this year, and which is honestly really wild because they replaced a bunch of other categories in order to put romantasy on the list. But regardless of that, this one seemed like the most interesting out of the romantasy books, to me at least, and that was honestly because it is an Egyptian-inspired epic fantasy. So a lot of the other romantasy books I feel like are by white authors and don't really involve other cultures, but this one seemed really interesting to me and something that I haven't seen before, so that's why I'm really excited for this one. And I feel like I've been in a more romancy mood recently, so I feel like this might be a really fun one to pick up. I don't know too much about the plot of this book, but one of the blurbs on the back says that it's a compelling tale of self-discovery, found family, and the meaning of justice, and also has an incomparable enemies to lovers arc, which has me a little bit excited. I personally only love enemies to lovers when it's in a fantasy because that's the only situation where it's actually believably enemies to lovers. In contemporary senses, it's just like a hate to love thing. They're not actually enemies, but in these situations, they're actually like on opposite sides of things, and that makes for some really fun romantic tension in my opinion. All right, next up, I also went to the dedicated horror bookstore in Toronto, and I decided to pick up the physical copy of one of my favorite books that I read from the recent vlog that I did where I read the horror nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards for this year, and that book is Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. I absolutely adored this book. It was a little bit slow to start, but once it picked up, it was just so fantastic, really creepy, had some really great horror elements to it, and also just a really endearing main character and side characters, and a really interesting mystery to it as well. I also just think that this cover is just really gorgeous, and that's part of why I wanted to own a copy. Basically, this book follows our main character who was a piano prodigy. She's the daughter of two pianists from China who fled China after the Cultural Revolution, and we are actually meeting her much later in life when she's actually given up on piano and she's working at like a fast food restaurant, and she gets mysteriously invited to work at this like beauty company called Holistic, and essentially there's some sinister and creepy things going on at this beauty company, and a lot of the employees at the store are told to take home like these various skincare products and beauty products, and they're all starting to see some interesting effects. This book is both like dark and surreal and sort of dreamlike, but it's also got this really beautiful human element to it. Parts of the book where the main character talks about her family were like the best parts for me because they just felt so real and raw, and honestly I can't recommend this book enough because it was just so fantastic. So if you're gonna pick up a horror book anytime soon, definitely pick up Natural Beauty. Alright, and then the next book that I picked up from the horror bookstore was Never Whistle at Night. This is a indigenous dark fiction anthology, so it's a bit of a like horror anthology from indigenous authors. It's edited by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Van Elst Jr., and it's also also got an introduction written by Stephen Graham Jones, who is the author of My Heart is a Chainsaw, which is a book that I know a lot of people love and it's on my list to read. The back of the book says that these are wholly original, shiver-inducing tales introducing the readers to ghosts, cursed hauntings, monstrous creatures, complex family legacies, desperate deeds, and chilling acts of revenge. It seems like a really fun anthology, and I've been meaning to read from more Indigenous authors, so I feel like this is a great window into a bunch of different authors' works, and I'm excited to see if there's any that I really enjoy and want to pick up more from. Alright, the next book that I picked up from the horror bookstore is one that I kind of picked up on a whim because I just really like the cover, and that book is Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth. This book essentially follows her main character Abby, who has recently gotten married, and she had a bit of a traumatic childhood and has always been kind of looking for a mother figure. So when she and her husband are in a situation where they have to move in with her mother-in-law, she is hoping that, you know, Laura, the mother-in-law, will be like this mother figure for her, but Laura ends up being really awful and mean and just terrible to her. But when Laura mysteriously takes her own life, her ghost starts to haunt Abby and her husband Ralph. And from there it has themes of like mental health and mental illness and just like a lot of spooky horror bits to it. And overall it just seems like a really interesting read. Like I just love the idea of the whole like mother-in-law, daughter-in-law dynamic because I think it's just such a funny and interesting one, and one that's often made to seem like it's gonna be an awful one. So I'm just interested to see the commentary here on this relationship. Alrighty, the next group of books that I have are ones that I grabbed from this bookstore called Another Story Bookstore, and it's this bookstore in Toronto that is just really committed to uplifting marginalized voices, and they happen to have a lot of books by Palestinian authors, which I was just really excited about. So first up I have The Duke Gets Desperate by Diana Quincy. This is by a Palestinian author, and it follows this Arab American woman who inherits this like old rundown English castle, but when this mysterious duke kind of comes to town and claims that it's his, she is sort of forced to deal with him and figure out what's going on. From there, it's obviously a romance, and it seems like it's gonna be a steamy one. I've just been like deeply craving historical romances recently. Like I'm thinking about picking up the rest of the Bridgerton series as well, so this is definitely gonna just scratch that itch for me. Next up, I grabbed Against the Loveless World by Susan Abdul Hawa. If you missed it, I announced this on Instagram, but I have restarted my book club, which was previously known as the Read and Color Book Club. It's now been renamed to the Boundless Book Club, and it's still gonna be on the app Fable, which you can join it down below. Essentially, we'll be reading this book as a soft launch for the book club from December into January, and you can join me and the other members of the book club to discuss the book on Fable. It's got a really nice interface where there are chat rooms for each chapter, so you can discuss the book without spoiling anyone, and it's overall just a really great way to discuss the book in real time. If you decide to buy the ebook on Fable itself, you can also use their interactive e-reader, which allows you to like highlight and add reactions and like comments in the book itself and socially read with other people. But essentially this book follows our main character Nar, who is sharing her life story from the confines of a Israeli solitary confinement cell. It seems like the book is following our character as she goes from someone who is just dreaming about a regular life and finds herself becoming a lot more politically radicalized. I'm really interested in seeing that transformation and seeing the different themes that this book pulls out about the situation in Palestine. And obviously I would highly recommend searching up some triggers when it comes to this book because I know it's going to be a heavy one, but I'm really excited to see what the author has to say. And a lot of you actually who have joined the book club already have mentioned to me on Fable that you really love the book, that you've read it before, and that you're really excited to discuss it with the group. So I am super hyped to pick this up. All right, and then next I also got this short story collection called Her First Palestinian and Other Stories by Saeed Tibi. All I really know about this one is that these several short stories show different sides of the diasporic Palestinian experience. Next I also grabbed a couple of nonfiction books. So the first was Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, Feminism, Internationalism, and Palestine. It's by Nadia Elia. This is by a Palestinian activist, and essentially she's going through these different themes that are obviously in the title of this book, and it's a nonfiction, so I think it's going to be a really interesting read, and she's connecting all these themes to Palestine and what's going on, but also just to the broader world. I've been finding recently that I'm enjoying a lot more historical and political books, so I'm excited to pick this up. And then the last book that I picked up from Another story bookstore was River in an Ocean, and this is essays on translation, and it's got essays from several different authors. A lot of them happen to be from Toronto, and the book covers several different themes and essentially revolves around the main concept of translation and how that affects things. The book says, moving across genres, belongings, and borders, these luminous texts by poets, writers, and translators invite us to consider translation as a form of ethical and political love, one that requires attentive regard of another and a making and unmaking of self. That description just has me super intrigued and interested in what these authors have to say. I've flipped through the book briefly and I noticed that some of the essays go through Arabic and some of them go through Tamil and like other languages, so I'm just really excited by the breadth of languages that are going to be covered as well. It's going to be an interesting read and I will report back on what I think. If you've read Babel by R.F. Kuang and you liked the translation elements in that book, I think this might be a fun one to pick up. Alright, next up I have a book that was actually sent to me by the publisher, and that is We Call to the Eye and the Night, Love Poems by Writers of Arab Heritage, and it's edited with an introduction by Hala Alyan and Zaina Heshembek. I'm really excited to pick this one up because I personally just love poetry, but I'm also intrigued to see like these love poems written by authors of Arab heritage. I know Arabic is a very beautiful and romantic language, and I'm interested to see how they convey that in English. And I'm also just interested in like reading more from authors from around the globe rather than just Western authors. Excited to check this one out. I will let you know if I really like any of these and if any authors jump out to me. Alright, and then next I went to one of the bookstores near my place that just does general fiction and a lot of, you know, popular fiction as well. So the first book that I grabbed from there was Evil Eye by Ataf Rum. This is by a Palestinian American author, and it follows this Palestinian American woman who is working at this like college, and when an incident sort of occurs and her job is threatened, her mother suggests that the reason for it might be this family curse. And so of course our main character is just trying to confront that aspect and the superstitions, but also her past, and it just seems like it's gonna be a really moving like literary fiction. And this book also happened to be one of the nominees for the fiction category for the Goodreads Choice Awards, so I'm excited by that, and honestly everyone I've heard from who has read this book really enjoyed it, so I'm excited to pick it up. Next up I have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Mosfeg. I know this book is really popular on Book Talk, but I know most people have like mixed feelings on it. I personally feel like I'm gonna really enjoy this one because it feels like it has a lot of like dark humor to it and just a really weird and interesting situation. I've heard it talked about as one of like those sad hot girl books, which is a genre of books that I found myself just absolutely loving, so I'm really excited to pick this one up. Although I had heard about this book and thought I might enjoy it for a while, the thing that actually sold me on it finally was when I realized that it's actually set in the year 2000. Basically the book is about this Columbia graduate who doesn't really have anything wrong with her life, but seems to have this like hole in her heart and her life and her existence, and she's trying to figure that out, and I think I'm just gonna love it in some way, shape, or form, so I'm excited to pick this one up. Next up I have another short story collection, and that is Bliss Montage by Ling Ma. This is the author of a book called Severance, which I also own and have been meaning to finish, but this is a short story collection from that author, and the back of the book says that the stories all cover themes of love and loneliness, connection and possession, friendship, motherhood, and the idea of home. Based off of some of the like short descriptions of some of the stories on the back of the book, I am pretty intrigued to see how this one goes. A few of my friends have read this one and absolutely loved it, so it's gotten me hyped to pick it up. Alright, the last book that I picked up from this last bookstore is Marta by Christopher Paolini. For those of you who are not my age and are much younger or older, you may not remember the Aragon series, or as it's actually known, the Inheritance Cycle, but it was a series of books, fantasy books, YA technically, that I grew up with and absolutely loved. I was so obsessed with those books. Like, I remember going to the bookstore the second that the third book came out and reading it compulsively because I just wanted to know what was gonna happen. And it's just a fantasy series that's like really close to my heart. I don't think it's the best fantasy series by any means, but it is very cool and very interesting. It's got different races of people like elves, dwarves, humans. It involves a lot of like war aspects and lots of magical elements to it that I think were just done really well in my opinion. It's been years since I've read the original series, but recently the author came out with this book about one of the sort of anti-hero characters in the series named Murtaugh, and from what I've heard this is actually set after the events of the original series. So I sense that we're also going to get some sneak peeks into, you know, what's going on with the other characters post the original series, and that has me just so hyped. And I also just really loved Murtaugh as a character when I was reading the original series, so I'm so excited to pick this up, but I also know that there's a very high chance it might disappoint me. I'm also tempted to like reread the original series before reading this, but since that series is just so long, like each book is over 500 pages, I don't know that I have the time to do that. So I may just jump into this and maybe like reread a summary of the previous books just to like remind myself of things. But I just have such fun memories with this series that I just can't wait to pick this up. Alrighty, and then finally I have 4 books, and these were sent to me by Penguin Random House Canada as a little like holiday Christmas mailing, and these are all books that involve like hot sad girls, I personally think. And it's really cute because they wrap these up and like add little descriptions to the front of each one that give you a sense of what the book might be. I think I remember seeing like the list of books in the email that they sent me, but I honestly don't remember. So we're gonna unwrap these together. Okay, so this first one says social media, unlikable protagonist, and obsession. So let's see what's inside. Oh! I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. Oh my god, this is so exciting because I've actually started reading this one on ebook a while ago, and it's not that I wasn't enjoying it, I just didn't like feel like reading it at the time, so I'm planning to get back to it. But this is so perfect because now I can get back to it on the physical copy. Essentially, from what I remember, this is about a unnamed narrator who is essentially obsessed with the married man that she's sleeping with and having an affair with, but she's also obsessed with one of his other lovers who happens to be an influencer. And so I remember the beginning of the book is like her just like stalking this woman on the internet and being kind of creepy, and I just feel like it's gonna have some really great commentary on social media and our world today, and I'm just so excited for this one. All right, next up we have a coming of age campus novel, and it's LGBTQ+, so let's see what this is. Oh, this is the adult Bronwyn Fisher. Okay, for those of you who have been watching my wrap-ups for the past few months, I did try to pick this one up. I was reading it through the audiobook, and I honestly wasn't enjoying it all that much, but now that I have the physical copy, maybe I'll try to pick it up again, because I did DNF it, so I didn't give it the full chance. This, from what I remember, follows this like young main character who is in university, and she essentially develops this like relationship or affair with this older woman, and it just sort of spirals from there. But I was very early into the book when I DNF'd it, so I don't know too much else about it. Okay, the next one is also a campus novel. It's the 90s versus the 2020s. That's interesting. And explores the meaning of friendship and consent. Okay, I don't know that I know what this is, so let's find out. The Damages by Genevieve Scott. Okay, I don't know this book at all. Let's see what it's about. Okay, so from what I can tell, this is set in 1997 and then also in 2020. And it involves this crazy like ice storm that happens in 1997, and the main character's roommate goes missing and she gets blamed partly for what happened. And then we're meeting her again in 2020 when her former partner, who is the father of an 11-year-old boy, gets accused of sexual assault. And so that investigation is bringing up old memories for her, I guess. This seems quite interesting, and it seems like it's gonna be a bit of a thriller-ish or have a mystery element to it. So I'm intrigued. I usually wouldn't pick up something like this, but it might be an opportunity to try something new. It says it explores themes of memory, trauma, friendship, and identity. All right, the final book says Wanderlust, self-destructive behavior, sex, and drugs. Those things are things that I love in a book, so let's see what this is. Desperada by Sofia Mostagimi. Ooh, this is interesting. The blurb on the front says it's a raw and raunchy debut from a remarkable new voice. Okay, so I don't know anything about this book, so let's find out. Ooh, okay, so this sounds interesting. It's by an Iranian-Canadian author, and it follows an Iranian-Canadian woman who is sort of jealous of her younger sister, who is kind of the perfect daughter, and our main character ends up like booking this one-way flight to like Iceland to like chase after a former lover, and then ends up like traveling through these different countries and trying to sort of find herself, but not in like a cheesy find myself way, more in like a I'm a chaotic mess and I'm just doing crazy shit. They have a definition of desperata on the back, and it says, in dire need of something, being filled with or in a state of despair, hopeless, without regard to danger or safety, reckless, furious. I'm intrigued by this because it feels like the main character is going to be a total hot mess, and sometimes I really enjoy that in books, especially when it's like a girl being a hot mess and figuring her shit out. You know, we love hot, sad girls doing their thing. Alrighty, with that said, those are all the books on this super long book haul. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you found a new book to pick up. I highly recommend checking out one of the books by the Palestinian authors that I mentioned today and checking out all the details below to, again, keep fighting for a ceasefire. As always, I appreciate you guys so much. Please let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and if you are planning to pick up any of these based off of what I said today. As always, if you haven't already, go check out my Instagram, Goodreads, TikTok, and Bindery down below, where you can get exclusive content from me, including a reaction video to the Goodreads finalists and several episodes on the submissions process for my publishing imprint, and a lot more other fun content to come in the next months. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!